Hello everyone, and welcome to the first video in my side series focusing on the various creatures and beings in Norse mythology. Since the lore behind beings like dwarves, elves, giants, etc. is too complex and confusing to be covered alongside another topic in my Journey Through Norse Mythology series, I decided to have a special series dedicated to them, where I can focus on them completely. And today's video will be about the Valkyries, the enigmatic choosers of the slain. The figures of these warrior maidens are quite famous around the world, yet how reliable of a picture we draw of them. Were the Valkyries truly the mystifying beautiful maidens that authors, artists and composers romanticize them to be? Well, just as with Valhalla, there is no easy answer to this, and so just like with our video about Valhalla, we look at individual mentions from Norse myths, poems and sagas, and see what we can find out about the Valkyries from them. Now, luckily for us, Valkyries were quite a popular poetic concept during the Viking Age, and so there is quite a few sagas and poems directly about them, or at the very least featuring them. Now, this doesn't mean that Valhalla was not a popular motive for poems. However, when it comes to the Valkyries, there is just easily much more sources that feature them that survive to this day. Now, first let's consult the Poetic Edda and the poem Grimnismal to hear Odin talk about the Valkyries. Quote, "They bring my horn, my Valkyries, Hrist and Mist, Skegjold and Skogul, Hild and Thruf, Hlok and Herfjord, Gol and Geirolul, Rangrith and Rathgrif, and Reginleith. They bring the Einherja beer." End quote. Here Odin lists the names of some of the Valkyries, as well as their purpose within Valhalla. Don't be mistaken, however, serving drinks and keeping the fallen heroes company was seen as the utmost honor. As we've talked in my last video about the sinister truth about Valhalla, the Einherja that fill Odin's hall are not just mere everyday warriors that fall in battle, but the best of the best, heroes of sagas who filled their lives with glorious deeds and members of armies that had won victory after victory for many years and had honed their skill throughout their lives. And with them come their commanders, the most sought-after guests that Odin brings into his hall. The kings and lords skilled with blade and wit alike, experts in combat and masters of battle tactics. These are the men that the Valkyries serve in Valhalla after their demise in battle. Yet we do not explicitly find out from the Poetic Edda who the Valkyries really are or what their true purpose was, most likely because it was so well known at the time that the bards and poets didn't feel the need to mention it in their poems. And so we need to look to Snorri Sturluson and his Prose Edda to find out more about the Valkyries. Quote, "There are still others who are to serve in Valhall, bear the drink around, wait upon the table and pass the ale horns. These are called Valkyries. Odin sends them to all battles, where they choose those who are to be slain, and rule over the victory. Gut and Rosta and the youngest Norn, Skuld, always ride to sway the battle and choose the slain." End quote. In this quote from Snorri's Prose Edda, we learn of the true purpose of the Valkyries, that is to ride on Odin's orders over battles and pick and choose those who will be worthy to enter Valhalla. However, Valkyries don't just seem to wait until the fighting is done and only then choose from the fallen, but rather they influence the battles themselves. On Odin's orders, they sway the battle so that the future heroes would live another day, and those in their prime would fall and gain entry to Valhalla. Snorri also mentions two more Valkyries, Gut and Rosta, who accompany the youngest Norn, Skuld, the aspect of all that is destined to be. However, this is the only mention we have of Skuld ever being present during the choosing of the slain by the Valkyries, and so we can do nothing but speculate about her purpose there. Perhaps she carves in runes the fates of those that are deemed to fall in battle, and her doing makes the battle sway in the way that destiny desires. But it is merely a speculation. It might just as well be Snorri's own invention. Now let's look into a skaldic poem that features the Valkyries enacting their divine duty. The skaldic poem Hakonarmál talks of the last battle of King Hakon the Good and his reception to Valhalla. King Hakon the Good was the king of Norway in the years 934 to 961. Even though King Hakon was of Christian conviction, Snorri in his book Heimskringla mentions that because Hakon was lenient towards the Old Norse religion and spared the temples of the gods from being torn down, he was granted a seat in Valhalla after his death. In his last battle, the Battle of Fitjar, Hakon defeated his enemies, but he himself was mortally wounded by an arrow during the fighting and later died of his injuries. This battle, and King Hakon's death, has been immortalized in this skaldic poem we are about to read, where we will learn that the Valkyries were the ones swaying the battle. We won't read the whole poem, nevertheless we won't leave out the important parts. Quote, "The god Odin sent Gondul and Skogul to choose among the kings which of Yngvi's race should go to Odin and live in Valhall." End quote. In this first stanza, we learn of Odin sending 2 of his Valkyries to decide, quote, which of Yngvi's race should go to Odin and live in Valhall. Yngvi was a legendary Swedish king of famous renown, and so this is most likely a reference to those that have met in battle at Fitjar as being his descendants or merely his kin or countrymen. Another thing to note here is that Odin himself does not pass judgment over the battle, but merely sends the Valkyries to pick and choose who will have the honor to come into Valhalla on their own accord. We will explore this independent power of decision that the Valkyries have later in this video, as even though they seem to act in accordance to Odin's will, they are more than mere servants and hold some deal of autonomy and humanity in their actions. But we will explore that later. For now we will return to Hakonarmál, where we will continue with the description of the battle itself. Quote, "They met Hakon in his armor, the king so glorious beneath his war standard. Killing shafts made ready, spears were waved on high, then was battle begun. A good company of Norsemen followed the free-handed king, the terror of the Danes stood in his bronze helmet. He threw off his armor, cast his mailcoat to the ground, the commander of fighters before he took to the battle. He joked with his comrades, he was defending his land, the glad-hearted prince clad in gilded helmet. The sword in prince's hand bit through armor as though thrust into water. Spear shafts rattled, shields shattered, swords crashed down into the skulls of men. Shields, skulls were trampled down by the sword blade of the generous king of the Northmen. The island rang with the clash of battle. The king stained the bright wall of shields with the blood of heroes. Swords flamed in bloody gashes, Lombard blades sought out men's lives. Blood surged against shields, the blood swept down in Stort's shore. Beneath the shield the red blood mingled, battle played against the bossed sky. In the battle the blood thundered, a host of men covered before the blood. With drawn swords the nobles sat, with slashed shields and mailcoats stabbed through. The army was sick at heart and must find its way to Valhall." End quote. This last stanza marks the end of the battle. Even though King Hakon's forces won, he himself was slain with a good number of his host. What follows is a conversation between the fallen king and the Valkyries that had come to collect the dead and bring them to Valhall. Quote, "Gondul said this, leaning on her spear shaft. Our fighting force will grow strong now that the gracious gods have bidden Hakon to their halls with a mighty army. The ruler heard what the Valkyries spoke, the glorious ones on horseback. Wisely they acted, they sat there helmeted, their shields raised before them. Why, spear Skogul, did you turn battle this way? Did I not deserve well of the gods? It was we who made sure that you held the field, and your foes fled. Let us both ride now, said the mighty Skogul, to the gods' green homes, there to tell Odin what the great prince is coming, now to visit him." End quote. In the stanzas we've just read, the Valkyrie Gondul first talks about how fortunate they are that the ranks of the Einherjar will be bolstered not only by a great warrior king, but also by his mighty army. To this, King Hakon reacts and asks the Valkyrie Skogul that if they found him and his army to be such an honorable fighting force, then why have they taken away their victory? To this, Skogul retorts that they made sure Hakon's forces would ultimately win the battle. However, he and his best warriors needed to answer Odin's call. Now we will continue with Odin in Valhalla, who is preparing the hall for the coming of Hakon. Quote, "Hermod and Bragi," said Odin, "go to meet the great prince, for a king is journeying, a valiant one it's clear, hither to our hall." The commander spoke. He was straight from the fight, drenched with blood he was. An evil disposition Odin has, I think. I distrust his intentions. You shall have peace from all the Einherjar. Come take drink with the gods, destroyer of earls. In here you find your 8 brothers, said Bragi. Then it was made clear how well this king had watched over their sacred places, and for that Hakon was given a mighty welcome by all the gods, the governing powers. End quote. These several stanzas talk about the reception of King Hakon into Valhalla. In stanza 14, Odin appoints Hermod and Bragi to go and welcome Hakon in his name. Bragi, as we've mentioned in my video about the sinister truth about Valhalla, was a real-life poet who was so renowned for his poetry that after his death, later generations imagine him as being accepted into Valhalla to sing to the fallen heroes of their tales of triumph and glory. Some Christian scholars, like Snorri Sturluson for example, try to even depict him as a god of poetry, but that is a statement unsupported by any other sources outside of those that Snorri himself has written, so you can imagine we have to take those with a hefty dose of skepticism. Hermod, on the other hand, is a very ambiguous figure in Norse myths. The only proper account of him comes from Snorri's Prose Edda, and there is a whole story dedicated to him where he journeys to Hel to bargain with Hela for the return of the bride god Balder. Even though this story is not mentioned in other sources we possess today, Snorri describes it with such integrity and overall completeness that it leads us to believe he truly was drawing from a source that is not available to us today. However, that does not mean Snorri could not have made little additions to it to satisfy his never-ending desire for orderly picture of Norse mythology, and as we've seen with his attempts at making the human poet Bragi into a god of poetry, he might have tried the same with Hermod, who is otherwise mentioned only in this stanza of Hakonarmál and one other stanza from a poem called Hyndlulfjof. In that stanza he is only mentioned in reference, but he is compared to Sigmund, who was a mortal Norse hero, and Sigmund actually appears in the poem Eiríksmál that we've mentioned in my video about Valhalla, as one of the Einherjar in Odin's hall. When we look at these two stanzas side by side, even though they are from two different poems, their meaning is identical. In both of these stanzas, Odin bids 2 men from his hall to go and welcome the king that is about to arrive into Valhalla. And since we know for sure that Sigmund was a Norse hero, and now we see him in this poem as one of the Einherjar, and we know Hermod was spoken of as being a Norse hero himself, I put forward my opinion that Hermod was a Norse hero of great renown, who after his death was accepted into Valhalla and became one of the Einherjar. And the notion of him being a god I simply view as one of either Snorri's own making or perhaps a reimagining of his place among the gods by later generations. In the end, this stanza, in my opinion, tells of Hermod, a great hero who is one of the Einherjar, and of Bragi, the great poet of Valhalla, who are both tasked by Odin to welcome King Hakon to Valhalla. When they do, however, King Hakon shares his distrust of Odin, most likely because he himself lived as a Christian, and so now he doesn't understand why Odin would accept him into Valhalla. Bragi reassures him, however, that he has no ill to fear from anyone in the hall, and it is explained that because King Hakon was tolerant of heathen temples and didn't have them destroyed, the gods granted him a seat in Valhalla. Even though this poem is focused on King Hakon, we've still learned a few things about the Valkyries. Even though they are servants to Odin's will, they still judge and decide the fate of battle themselves. It seems Odin only cares about his wishes being fulfilled and those he wants in his hall to be brought there, but the outcome of battles is something he leaves to the decision of the Valkyries. However, sometimes Odin might send the Valkyries not to collect the dead, but actually make sure those that Odin favors will triumph in battle. In such a case, he sends the Valkyries to influence the battle in his champion's favor, and perhaps even has his Valkyries shield him from harm. In the poem Sigurdrifumal, we can see this example, and what more, this story tells of a Valkyrie that actually disobeyed Odin's direct orders, and for that was cursed with a sleeping curse, from which she could never wake alone. And yes, this is the story from which the tale of Sleeping Beauty actually came from. We'll read a part of the story and learn more about what this Valkyrie has done to displease Odin so much. Quote, Sigurd rode up to the mountain Hindrafjall, south towards Frankish lands. He saw great light on a mountain, as though a fire burned there, and it glowed against the sky. When he came to it, he saw a fortress, and there were flags flying on top of it. Sigurd went into the fortress and saw a person sleeping there on the floor, fully armed. He took the helmet off first, and then he realized this person was a woman. Her chainmail was so tight as if it had grown to her skin. He took his sword Gram and cut the chainmail off, first cutting down the middle and then both sleeves. Then he took the chainmail off of her, and she woke up and saw Sigurd and said, "What broke the chainmail? Why am I awake? Who has freed me from my imprisoning armor?" He answered, "Sigmund's son is the one who cut it. Sigurd's sword is fresh from feeding the ravens." She said, "I have slept so long. I have been asleep so long. Human sorrows last so long. Odin cursed me never to break the sleeping spell by my own power." Sigurd sat down and asked her name. She was named Sigurdrifa, and she was a Valkyrie. She said that 2 kings had fought. One was named Hjalm Gunnard. He was old and a great warrior, and Odin had promised him victory. The other was named Agnar, brother of Hautha, who received help from no one. Sigurdrifa killed Hjalm Gunnar in this battle, but Odin stung her with a sleep thorn in revenge for this, and said she would never again choose victories in battle, and that she would have to marry. End quote. And the rest of the poem centers around Sigurdrifa conveying many wisdoms and advices to Sigurd, which even contain the secrets about the power of the runes. From this and from the stanzas we have read, we can derive that Valkyries were powerful entities in their own right, and even though servants to Odin, they had their own will and morality that could make them disobey Odin's wishes under certain circumstances. We do not know why in this particular case the Valkyrie Sigurdrifa defied Odin's wishes and instead helped the enemy of Odin's favored champion, but since we know Valkyries were the ones choosing who were the ones worthy to come into Valhalla, perhaps Sigurdrifa decided that it was time for the old great warrior Hjalm Gunnard to be summoned into the Golden Hall, and let his enemy Agnar prove himself in further battles before he would win his own seat in Odin's Hall. Or perhaps there is a story that is now lost to the ages, where Sigurdrifa and Agnar fell in love, and she then defied Odin's wishes to keep her lover from harm's way. There are many stories of Valkyries falling in love with human men and even marrying them, so this wouldn't be such a stretch. This also shows us that the Valkyries are not just mere puppets, but are quite human at heart. This goes hand in hand with the beautiful image of the Valkyries as gorgeous maidens clad in armor, riding upon horseback over the battlefield, like dignified spirits of justice, and choosing those that deserve to enter Valhalla, where they keep them company. This, even though accurate depiction of the Valkyries, is however also a very selective one. There is no doubt a great amount of sagas and poems where Valkyries are depicted in this light. However, we cannot cherry-pick that image and ignore the original nature of the Valkyries. In their origins, Valkyries were depicted as much cruder and vile beings, who exulted in battle and carnage with sinister delight. We'll look at this depiction of the Valkyries to see just how different figures they are compared to the noble and beautiful romanticized picture of the Valkyries we've talked about before. The poem we'll read, named Darafarljof, speaks of the Valkyries judging over the Battle of Klontarf. This battle took place in the year 1014 in Ireland, and it was fought between the armies of the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, and the forces of a Norse-Irish alliance which aimed to challenge the rule of the High King and strive for autonomy. Even though the High King Brian fell during this battle, it still ended in a decisive victory of his forces and forever crippled the Norse hold on Ireland. This battle, and even the unification wars during which King Brian united all the kingdoms of Ireland under his rule, is a story worthy of a series of videos on its own. However, today we are talking about a poem that was made about this battle that features the Valkyries. Quote, "On Good Friday that went happen in Caithness, that a man whose name was Daurud went out. He saw folk riding, 12 together, to a bower, and there they were all lost to his sight. He went to that bower, and looked in through a window slit that was in it, and saw that there were women inside, and they had set up a loom. Men's heads were the weights, but men's entrails were the warp and wed. A sword was the shuttle, and the reels were arrows. They sang these songs, and he learned them by heart. Blood rains from the cloudy web on the broad loom of slaughter. The web of man, grey as armour, is now being woven. The Valkyries will cross it with a crimson weft. The warp is made of human entrails. Human heads are used as heddle weights. The heddle rods are blood-wet spears. The shafts are iron-bound, and arrows are the shuttles. With swords we will weave this web of battle. The Valkyries go weaving with drawn swords, Hild and Hjorfrimul, Sangrit and Swipul. Spears will shatter, shields will splinter, swords will gnaw like wolves through armour. Let us now wind the web of war which the young king once waged. Let us advance and wade through the ranks where friends of ours are exchanging blows. Let us now wind the web of war and then follow the king to battle. Gun and Gondul can see there the blood-spattered shields that guarded the king. Let us now wind the web of war where the warrior banners are forging forward. Let his life not be taken. Only the Valkyries can choose the slain. Lands will be ruled by new peoples who once inhabited outlying headlands. We pronounce a great king destined to die. Now an earl is felled by spears. The men of Ireland will suffer a grief that will never grow old in the minds of men. The web is now woven and the battlefield reddened. The news of disaster will spread through lands. It is horrible now to look around as a blood-red cloud darkens the sky. The heavens are stained with the blood of men as the Valkyries sing their song. We sang well victory songs for the young king. Hail to our singing. Let him who listens to our Valkyrie song learn it well and tell it to others. Let us ride our horses hard on bare backs with swords unsheathed away from here. And then they tore the woven cloth from the loom and ripped it to pieces, each keeping the shred she held in her hands. The women mounted their horses and rode away, 6 to the south and 6 to the north." End quote. The sinister depiction of the Valkyries we can find here is very much unlike the one of the glorious maidens we've talked of before. Here they quite literally weave the web of battle, entwining a tapestry of slaughter. They weave the web of war from human entrails and body parts, with blood-stained weapons for tools, singing songs of bloodshed as they revel in the carnage. This image of the Valkyries may not be as well known or popular. However, it is important to realize that they weren't always such romanticized figures as we see them today. There is of course more to find out about the Valkyries, but this is all I can tell you from the sources I have on hand. I am more than willing to revisit this topic in the future to bring you more interesting lore and information, but this would be all for today, and I bid you all farewell until next time.